murdered, regardless of race, religion, background, and origin. Human life is right to every single person on this planet. So why do we still have blood on our hands? For years, capital punishment has been riddled with flaws, convicting and executing innocent people. Misconduct of law enforcement, eyewitness misidentification, botched executions, and faulty handlings of evidence are just a few of the factors that lead to injustice in our legal system. In 1991, Troy Anthony Davis, a Georgia death row inmate, was convicted and sentenced to death. Despite no physical evidence found at the crime scene, and 7 out of the 9 prosecution witnesses recanting their testimonies, Troy Davis still sits on Georgia's death row. Witnesses stated that they were being coerced by the police to tell them what they wanted to hear. One witness was on parole and said that the detective would help her if she said that Davis committed the crime. When Davis was first sent to prison, he was put into an isolated cell for 6 months, rather than being with the rest of the population like the other inmates. He received daily threats from guards. When he was put into his death watch cell, 24 hours before his scheduled execution, Troy Davis stated, "It really affected me and everyone on death row because you had grown men crying." Inmates began dropping their appeals, stating that if Troy Davis couldn't get justice, then no one could. So do we really want innocent blood on our hands? The leading cause for wrongful convictions is eyewitness misidentification. DNA testing has proven that eyewitness identification is often unreliable. In some cases, witnesses have changed their description of a possible perpetrator because they have seen a particular suspect, and their memory is clouded with the idea that this person is most likely the perpetrator, rather than relying on their prior testimony. There have been cases when witnesses have made hesitant decisions of photo lineups, stating that they thought or it might be this person. And scientists have concluded that eyewitness identification, if it is not properly recorded, can become contaminated and falsely accuse a person of a crime. So isn't this enough to spare a human being's life? In 1994, Michael Blair, a resident of Texas, was convicted and sentenced to death. His conviction was based on faulty witness testimony and improper forensic science. Hairs and fibers were collected from Michael Blair's car and the crime scene, and a comparison was made by forensic scientists. They stated that the hairs and fibers in Blair's car had a strong association with those found at the crime scene. But even though they could not make an absolutely positive identification, Blair was sentenced to death regardless. In 2002, Michael Blair and his attorneys demanded that DNA testing be done on the hairs found at the crime scene. And after 6 years of testing, it was proven that he was innocent. On August 28, 2008, after 13 and a half years spent on death row for a crime that he did not commit, Michael Blair was finally exonerated. And in some other cases, evidence that has been collected from a crime scene can become improperly stored in unfitting temperatures or can also become misplaced. And this can also affect a person's innocence. So is the killing of an innocent person really worth the risk to show that murder is wrong? Like all death row inmates, those that are innocent still face the pain, fear, and psychological torture of waiting to be executed. Almost 90% of all death row inmates take anxiety medication, and some become insane, delusional, and suicidal. Not knowing when you will be executed, whether it is in a month, a year, or 10 years, poses great stress and suffering on inmates. Also, the process of saying goodbye to family is torture in itself. Not only do death row inmates face mental and emotional problems, but also the possibility of a botched execution. In some instances of electrocution, inmates have received bloody noses, heads have caught on fire, and witnesses hear and smell the sizzling and burning of human flesh. In some gas chamber executions, witnesses have reported guttural noises, moans, and skin color turning from red to purple. One man died bashing his head against a steel pole as an attempt to relieve himself of the agony. Lethal injection, said to be the most humane method, also has flaws. There have been reactions to the drugs of inmates choking, convulsing, and being paralyzed and not able to express that they are in pain. Also, sometimes it is difficult to find a suitable vein to administer the drugs, causing an inmate to be stabbed with the needle 10 to even 40 times. It is unfathomable to even think of an innocent person going through a process like this, a process that promotes vengeance. There is no such thing as death being humane when it is administered from one human being to another. Now, out of the 50 states, 14 are non-death penalty and 36 are death penalty states. Since 1973, over 130 innocent people have been exonerated from death row. And because of the mistakes made in our justice system, we do not know how many innocent people have been executed. There is no justification for taking a life, and when we execute those who are convicted of committing a capital crime, we can never take back our mistakes. So rather than feeding the cycle of hatred, shouldn't we relieve it? If we really want peace in this world, shouldn't we stop this from happening? Human life is sacred, and as Martin Luther King Jr. once stated, that old law about an eye for an eye leaves everybody blind. The time is always right to do the right thing, or in this case, to save a life.